Hi, Eva.
Alison,
how are you?
Doing well.
Look at us, eh?
Watching everybody with their Western gear on and everything, I emailed Martin Painter and I said, hey, you got an old jersey, any chance, with the number 10 on it? So he's looking for me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Right?
I
like
still
all
have
these
lots.
years. Yeah.
So we have a few more minutes between this one for people to run and do their things. And
Test, test, hello.
Hi, Marty. I heard you. Just letting you know.
Thank you very much.
Okay, all right.
Nice to see you, girl. How are you?
I know. Nice to see you too. I was so excited to see your name on this one.
This is it. Hello, everybody. But just great that we're hooked up because I've got different laptops, different internet providers. Don't want to mess this up.
hi, Cheryl.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
No, we can't hear you. I'm just dropping that music. I'm doing a live panel right now. Sorry about that. Thanks.
Hi, Alison.
Hello, Lori.
Hi.
Okay. I think we will get started. And we'll let people sort it out as we go. We're still waiting for Shireen to come in. Can we confirm that we can hear everybody?
Hi, Alison.
All right.
Can you hear me?
So, welcome to the Off the Field panel. This is the third and final panel for today. My name is Alison Doherty, and as a professor of sport management in the School of Kinesiology at Western, I'm very fortunate to stay in the game because I get to study and teach about sport for my living, as many of these women do as well. And I also get to stay in the game as a volunteer coach. I'm very pleased to welcome to this panel several outstanding women. We have joining us Laura Ewing, who is a journalist with the Canadian Press and has covered both summer and winter Olympic Games, and in fact is really a premier Olympic journalist and has won awards for her reporting. She also covers the NBA Raptors, which she's done for 18 years, and had, I'm sure, the great excitement and pleasure to cover that team when they won the NBA title. And just as a note, not only was Laurie a former track and field athlete at Simon Fraser, we understand that she still holds the 200-meter record. Next, I want to introduce Shireen Ahmed, who is a sport journalist and activist who focuses on Muslim women and the intersections of race and misogyny in sport. And Shireen is notable for using multiple media outlets for her messaging, including Burn It All Down, which is a feminist sports broadcast. Now, I'm just meeting Laurie and Shireen for the first time, but I have known our next panelist, Cheryl Finn, for a long time, and she would be one of the first sportswomen that I met when I came to London. We came here around the same time. And she is a longtime sport administrator in our community, beginning with the London Sports Council, which is how I got to know her. She also was a longtime director of Sport Tourism London and responsible for hosting several of the national and international events that we've been very proud to host in London. I've also known Eva Havaris for a long time in several roles. She was a student at Western and a graduate student in our sport management program. And most notably, she wasn't just a former soccer player at Western, she was a soccer star at Western, and I'll let you look up her stats on that. And she has been a multidimensional sport leader, most recently working with the York United Football Club of the Canadian Premier League. And last, but certainly not least, is Senator Marty Deacon. Marty actually started out as a volunteer coach and a physical education teacher, but as you can see, she's gone on to serve on numerous boards, and as a sport leader, she's a director on the Canadian Olympic Committee and for Commonwealth Games Canada. She has been a national team leader in the sport of badminton at 2 Olympic Games. She was a mission team leader at the 2007 Pan Am Games, 2008 Beijing Olympics, and the chef de mission for the 2000 Commonwealth Games in Delhi, India. She's been a Senator of Canada since 2018, where she continues to advocate for girls and women in sport. And I just want to note
Alison, you're muted.
Hi, Alison. I think you've pushed the mute button. If you see at the bottom next to the camera, there's a microphone. Can you click that to take yourself off mute? You can't unmute yourself. If you can't unmute yourself, I'll just say quickly, just refresh your browser and come straight back in, and it should reset your access so you have microphone access again. I'm thinking she'll be back, but Marty, we can now see you and hear you, so that is a good start.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll just wait for Alison to come back.
Good to see your face, Marty.
Yeah, it was like I didn't even notice. Welcome back.
Can you hear me now? How much of that did I miss? Yes.
You
You
All of
got
it?
through the introductions.
You got all the intros in, Allison.
I got
Yeah.
all of you in?
Mhm.
You did.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Shireen, for letting me know, because I really wanted to get those points across and set up the stage for you folks, because it's amazing to have you here. Okay, so we're going to get to some questions, and I'm going to start with Lori, because I know she's going to be really happy about that. So Lori, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, and can you tell us about your path to your involvement in sport and where you are today as a sport journalist?
Yeah, I must admit, I kind of groan when people ask me this question, because I took such a convoluted path to get to where I am. Sometimes I feel like I kind of like tripped over backwards and fell into this job. So I'm going to have to tell you like a couple of little mini stories at points in my life. First of all, I guess, like I grew up in an athletic family. My dad was a professional football player and rugby player. My brother did a ton of different sports, and I did figure skating, swimming, track and field. But when I was growing up, my mom was quite ill, and she battled mental health and addiction issues. And she left us when I was in grade 10. And I guess high school, I kind of just like, I kind of just like lost myself a little bit and fell through the cracks. And grade 12, I just stopped going to school. And the sad thing was, like, nobody noticed. It was a few weeks before anybody noticed. And it was my track coach, my high school track coach, because I wasn't going to class, but I was going to track practice every day. So he just bumped into one of my teachers in the hallway, who said, by the way, Lori hasn't been to school in weeks, and she's behind in all these exams, blah, blah, blah. So it was him that actually, my track coach, who got me through high school. Otherwise, I wouldn't have graduated. He actually went to the point of like picking me up at my house to drive me to school in the mornings. So that was like the first turning point. And I guess the second point, fast forward a couple of years, and I did 2 years of university track, did really well. And I got pregnant when I was 20. Had my daughter at 21, had no idea what I was going to do, how I was going to support us. I just thought I'd wing it. But so I thought, well, I kind of thought, well, maybe I can get an office job, or maybe I can go back to running. So I went back to university, ran track for another 2 years, and it was fabulous. It was like an instant support network. I was a single mother, and here I had all these wonderful teammates that helped me raise my daughter. The school was amazing about allowing her to travel with me. I remember being at the Mount Sac relays in California. That was where my daughter learned how to walk, was in our motel room, between the two beds in our motel room. And yeah, it was just such a fabulous support network. Third story, this is the last one. My husband and I'm now married. We moved to Calgary, mostly for track, partly because the cost of living in Vancouver was so high. And I was going to go into social work at the University of Calgary, and my husband was working at the Calgary Herald. He wanted to be a journalist, and a job opened up there that was really well paying. Was called, I'm sure there's nobody on this call that knows what a copy runner is, but it's basically like answering phones and stuff like that. And I couldn't pass up the money, so I took that job. And we had sort of like a Sunday page where you could, like, we had guest columnists and stuff, and the sports editor at the time asked if I wanted to write a couple of pieces because I was still an athlete, and I did that. And then one day he just called me into his office and said, "We'd like you to be a full-time sports writer." And they said, like, the job wouldn't exist if you didn't take it. So that's how I got into it. And like literally up until that moment, and even times after that, that's not exactly what I wanted to do with my life. but it's been fabulous. I wouldn't have changed anything. Yeah, so, but I guess the reason I wanted to tell this story, and I'm sorry it's so long, but I feel like when I come across athletes, there's this overlying theme of when they struggle there's times when they struggle in life, and sport is such a safety net for them, or, a strong pillar for them to reach out to. And I just think it speaks to the power of sport. So yeah, that's my story.
Great, thanks very much, Lori. And that's great to hear about that winding path that you took in and out of sport, and that is a very strong message that the pathway may not be straight. We may come back into it. And you've talked about some supporters along the way. What would you say are some of the best things about your involvement as a journalist?
I love the interaction with the athletes. I find I remember telling Clara Hughes this like years after she retired. Like, I remember talking to her on the phone one day, and it was a long conversation. I got off the phone and I was like, wow, my day is like so much better for having talked to this person. And I get that all the time. Yeah, and that's what I love the most, is the interaction with the athletes.
Right. And so probably a lot of journalists would say that maybe some stories are better than others, but the fact you get to talk about two athletes and cover athletes and hear their story. All right. Thanks very much for sharing that, Lori. We'll get back to you. I'm going to turn to Shireen now, who also tells stories about athletes and about sport. And Shireen, can you share with us your pathway to your involvement as a sport journalist and activist?
Yes, thanks. If I may, really, really quickly, I don't know if there was a land acknowledgement already done this morning, but I would really like to be able to do that because of where I'm sitting. I'm actually in Mississauga, Ontario, and I'm on land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, which is traditional territory of Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe people. So I just wanted to take a second to recognize where I am. I know where this is virtual, we're all over the place, but I wanted to do that. Thank you. I also wanted to say that my story is very much like Lori's. I didn't go to journalism school. In fact, I'm doing my master's right now at Ryerson in media production. So it's a very, sports had always been intertwined in my life. My mother and father were both athletes in their own right, but not in this country. They immigrated from Pakistan, and my dad in the 60s, he was an oarsman. And it's really interesting because the path that sort of affected my family also infected me here, although I was born in Canada. Not that that's relevant to how one experiences injustice in realms. I mean, it's all correlated. And my father was an oarsman in Pakistan and came here. And it was really interesting that he was prevented from rowing in a crew in his home country because folks that were white dominant in that club wouldn't let him do that there. So when he came to Canada, he rowed at McGill and he rowed at Carleton. And he, I always saw that in my life. He played squash with my mom. So seeing a physically active woman was never odd for me. It was never a thing that I didn't see. Like, I grew up in Halifax. My family would go to Dalplex on the weekend, and my parents would play squash. We would play badminton. My brother and I would swim, and I was a competitive swimmer as well. So dabbled in that for a while. Soccer was my first love. And I was a super rambunctious child, and my parents had no idea what to do with me. And then they put me on the field when I was 5, and it completely made sense. I feel like intrinsically, soccer is one of the only sports that makes sense to me conceptually. And I, have children that play volleyball and basketball competitively. And I'm like, I don't understand why you would take a charge. I feel like that's obstruction and that's reckless. So my issues with basketball notwithstanding, soccer made sense. And as somebody who is a very sort of tenacious forward, the skills that were appreciated, and as young women, we're socialized to be demure and to be this and that, but when you're tenacious and want something, it works well as a forward. So the skills that I had were appreciated on the pitch. So I had to be quiet in class, but I had to be myself. So it was one place. Also, growing up in the 80s in Halifax, I was pretty much the only racialized person in my entire grade. There's one more. And felt isolated. So sport gave me a sense of belonging. And whether we feel not included for a variety of reasons, sport's one way to connect people. I'm very careful not to use the words unite, because I think in the systems that we have of injustice in sport, which we would be naive not to recognize, it doesn't unite, but it connects. And sport is a very powerful way of connecting people. And I feel that strongly, which is why I do the work I do. I was a walk-on for the University of Toronto, and I played left bench. Actually, I tell people I played left bench, which is fine. It was great. And then I decided to wear a headscarf in my third year. And I didn't talk to my coach about it. I didn't talk to anybody about it. And suddenly playing soccer for UT was no longer an option because nobody knew what to do with me. And as we know, the hijab bans from FIFA weren't put into play until 2007, until 2014. For football specifically, but there was no rule, and soccer loves rules. So there's nothing to say I couldn't wear it, but there was nothing to say I could wear it. So the refs had no idea what to do with me. I would suit up in my club for about every match and maybe played 10 of them. No, sorry, 10% of them. So it wasn't worth my time. And it was a new thing for me. It was just something I came to on my own. And that's very much intertwined with why I tell stories the way that I do. There was very little written about hijab bans at the time, and I didn't like the way that they were written. And Lori and I are part of an industry that is 90% in Canada, 95% white, able-bodied, cishet men. And we, kind of sometimes get into that conversation because it's a part of what we do. And I think that that's also relevant to why I started off. I will say this, that my journey into journalism, and I've always written, my background is in political science and women's studies. And then I was a frontliner in social work. I was a settlement counselor for a really long time that used sports to integrate and have newcomers to Canada come and be part of something greater. I used to get free tickets from the Marleys, free tickets from wherever I could get them. The Argos would send her agency tickets, and I would take all the kids and all the girls because I wanted them to be a part of that. And I wanted to use that to sort of say, hey, you can love this. And one particular young woman who had recently moved from the DRC and came as a refugee, fell in love with the Argos to an extent that she became a part of their fan club and was like a secretary of their fan club for years. So you never know what you fall in love with in sport. You don't know what you're connected with. And I find these stories very heartwarming and very important. So I also have 4 children. I'm a single mom and I raised them. So there was that, and did a lot of Uber driving. I coached soccer with children in a backpack on my back for a really long time. And I focused predominantly on racialized and marginalized communities, where I found that it wasn't the skill level. And I see that a lot with young women. It was skill level. That wasn't the problem. You can teach people skill. It was confidence that the girls were not being taught. And my daughter's was a rep soccer player. She took a gap year this year. She was supposed to be in university, but took a year off. Was intending to play in university as well, hopefully will in the fall, sorry. But when she turned 13, half of her team quit. And I'm looking around going, where's this? Excuse me, she's a goalkeeper and is very close to her defenders. So one day she was just really distraught because 2 of her defenders, and when you're a keeper, your defenders are your people, and they were gone. And it was so hard to see that. And why was that happening? And why was this happening to young girls? Why were they leaving the sport? So all of these things meshed together with my own experiences in life. Just to jump back to university, I started to row for U of T. So my final 2 years of school, I rowed for U of T because they didn't have hijab restrictions. And there were nobody cared what you wore as long as you pulled hard. And that was wonderful. And I loved it. But like I said, it wasn't my first love. I loved rowing. Don't miss waking up at 3:30 and going to the Argos Club. But yes, I loved it. And it made me feel again part of something, but I missed soccer desperately. So a way that I wove that in was writing about it. And nobody would pay me to do that. Nobody would give me a shot. So I blogged. And I would rather have had my stories cited to myself on my own blog than have them scooped by somebody else or done unpaid work, which is very common for women starting out in sports media. You intern or you do this. So when the hijab ban was lifted in 2014, and I had been doing this for 2 or 3 years already, some of the work I had done, thank you, internet, was caught on to the attention of some other sports journalists. And now one of my mentors, Dave Zirin, is the sports editor of The Nation in the United States. And he had me on a show, and then we co-wrote together, and you build it slowly. But my pathway and Lori's pathway is not traditional. And I think not coming into it, and I didn't come into an industry with any connections or anything. It's literally nobody gave me anything. And you work, especially being so different, but having a clear idea of what I wanted to say has been very helpful. I don't mince my words. I'm very clear on what stories I need to tell and what I believe should be told. I, have had people accuse me of lack of objectivity, and I don't have time for shenanigans and nonsense. And that's a gatekeeping tactic. And I don't have time for it. My responsibility as a journalist is to be fair and accurate. And
Right.
that's what I do.
Thank you so much, Shireen. That is amazing to hear your story and to hear about your pathway and the non-traditional stories, because I think that's a really important message for this conference for sure. And I'll just, do a little shout out to, check out Shireen's website and some of her blogs, because, thank you, Shireen, for writing the stories that you're passionate about and that will have and will make a difference for lots of people in sport. I'm going to move now to Cheryl Finn. And Cheryl, again, longtime sport administrator here in London. And if you can tell us about your pathway to where you are today and some of the best things about your being in this role.
Yeah, sure. My pathway may be a little different than some. I grew up in a very small town in Northern Ontario. We had one high school, and I was the oldest of 5 children, and my father was the principal of that high school. And I remember my first day in grade 9, we were a very athletic family. We were involved in sport from day one. I remember my dad coming home for lunch because we lived very close to the school, and he handed me a piece of paper, and it had tryout schedules for everything. Here's when you're going to try out for cross country, for basketball, for volleyball. Here's where you're going to maybe run for student politics. Here's all of this schedule. It was jam-packed, and I said, geez, Dad, when am I going to have time for other stuff? And of course, my grade 9 brain is saying, friends, parties, all the things that we're thinking of. And he sat me down and he said, listen, this community has charged me with managing their children. And if I can't show that within my own family, how will they trust me to do that with theirs? And so sport became that foundation to everything. And I often say I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. I swam competitively. I swam artistically as a synchronized swimmer. I figure skated. I ran. I played tennis. I was an OFSA athlete in tennis with my partner. I curled. I played everything, but my love was basketball, and I stayed with that the longest. So what really kind of helped me going forward is the fact that I learned the culture within all of these sports, and every sport, as we know, has a different culture. And as an administrator looking to engage all sport and bring it to our city, you really had to be able to speak that language. So I was very, very thankful for that. Like Shireen and like Teresa on the panel as well, the previous panels, I am the mother of 4 children, 3 of them girls. And it was very important to me that sport become that foundation, as the messaging is clear moving forward, that the lessons we learn from sport are very important in all aspects of our lives. Thank you, Alison.
Thanks, Cheryl. And it sounds like you have since, taken up that cause in London, Ontario, and been a keeper, or at least a leader of community sport here from that very strong foundation. Okay, Eva, also a not as long a time, but very experienced sport administrator. Tell us about your story. I didn't list all the experiences that you've had along the way, but I'm sure the participants here would be interested to know where you've been and how you got to where you are today.
Sounds good. Thanks, Alison. I'll just give a quick shout out to Tourism London and Western for making this happen. Vicky, Christine, I know this has been in the works for a long time now, but to make this happen and to offer it for free is a huge thing. It's a great start. So thank you. And thank you for having me be part of this. So I've been in sport my whole life. Since 4 years old is when I stepped on a soccer field, played competitive soccer with boys until I was 14. Discovered many other sports along the way in high school. So it has been in my life, since I was a kid. And funny enough, as I've been hearing everybody talk, I don't know why I ever thought I wouldn't end up working in sport. It never crossed my mind, but when I think of that and think of it being part of my journey since a very young age, yeah, of course I'm working in sport now. So with that said, I went down to the States. I played Division I soccer. I played there for 2 years, and I played in 2 different schools, funny enough, and I never found the combination of everything I was looking for. A great soccer experience, a great school experience, a great city to live in. I couldn't piece it together. And funny enough, I came home, which is London, Ontario, and everything I was looking for was Western. Which was right in my backyard. So I am so grateful to this day to be part of the Western community and an alumni. I tell everybody when they ask me what school should they go to Western. With all of that, so I played my years varsity soccer. I finished there. I always knew I was going to get into coaching. And of course, I had wonderful coaches, Mary Riesbos, Mike Van Bussel, that encouraged me to continue on when I was done planning to be part of the coaching staff at Western. From there, I ended up joining Fanshawe as a head coach. But at the same time, I had my coach, Mike Van Bussel, at the time at Western, had said to me, hey, have you ever thought of doing a master's in sport management? And I hadn't at all. Originally, I was thinking I'd work for the FBI if I stayed in the States. And if not, coming back to London, well, I'd go on and be a lawyer and work in law and do things like this. And one morning, so I have Mike having this conversation with me about all of these opportunities that were possible in sport. And I think at that time, sport management programs were just starting in the country. So I always had a passion for business. My dad is an entrepreneur, so I loved that side of things. And I woke up one morning and literally my decision was, do I want to work with healthy-minded people or in this law path where it could get kind of ugly and perhaps take a toll on me? The other part of that was I couldn't imagine my life without sport. Even coaching and things like that, I just couldn't imagine sort of really taking a side veer into law and that field. So I completed my master's in sport management. I started working with Rugby Canada during that time as a volunteer manager with the national team program. So this was the first time I got onto the side of sport that was administrative. Really loved it. Was very surprised that I loved it so much. And then was very fortunate through Rugby Canada. I got a really great position as soon as I graduated my master's. I had studied Sport Canada's funding and accountability framework, and that was what my thesis was, for the purpose of eventually getting to either Sport Canada or the national sport organization level and working in sport in that way. So I kind of had mapped it at that time. I was very intentional about my graduate work, very intentional about where I wanted to work in sport. And through that time, I've been with rugby, taekwondo. I got my first CEO job with Taekwondo Canada, 30 years old, crash course in leading an NSO. And then from there, went on to Equestrian Canada, many great years with the Olympic Committee and in those sessions, and really being surrounded by sort of the best of the best in the sport industry in this country. And then recently, in the last few years, joined the Canadian Premier League. So it's a men's professional soccer league here in Canada. And this was the first time for me being on the professional side of sport. and building basically from the ground up and having the opportunity to do that. But I've spent my entire career at the national level of the industry.
Great, thanks, Eva. And I think we will move along and have our last panelist, and then we'll come back to some questions. So, Senator Marty Deacon, we're pleased to have you here. You have quite a long and varied pathway in sport as well. So maybe you can tell us about what that looks like, and who were some inspirations and supports along the way.
Sure, thank you, and good morning, and wonderful listening to everybody this morning from 9 o'clock. Jana did a great start. Thank you for hosting this. I hope it's the first of many. I know it's been a bit preemptive, but really, really great. And I just, as I start, I first of all think about Western. I can't help because I've got purple all around me this morning, and I'm thinking about Western, and so thankful. That for me was a graduate school setting where I did my master's in a combined master's with the biz school and arts and working with coaches and leadership, and absolutely had the chance to be on 2 varsity teams, and it's pretty special winning at Western, I have to say, both in rowing and badminton. My twin sister Mary has committed to UWO swimming for years and has taught actuarial science at Western, and just I look back with the fondest memories, so it's great to be here. And Western is pivotal in my story. And so very quickly, I feel that when I was 10 or 11, go back, and I know I'm by far the oldest around this table today, but so that's a long time ago. I knew that in growing up, I needed something, and it was getting involved in a sport, and it was getting involved in the sport of badminton, which is not big in Canada, but it's like hockey on the other side of the world, I can assure you. And so I started off as a recreational player, as a club player, and still fondly remember that day in grade 9 when we got a coach. We actually, the tennis and the squash guy could do whatever the badminton players needed for a while, and then we kind of started getting good. And there were 9 boys and myself. And I remember the day in grade 9 when my coach arrived with a bag, and his racket bag was broken, a belt was keeping it up, his car broke down on the way. He was a grad student at U of T just trying to make ends meet, but it was the beginning of a very important and influential part of my life, and that was being part of something in a sport. And I would say that there are things that my coach inherently understood about what I could and couldn't bring to the game, and was very, very important to me. And playing through those years and doing my undergrad, I came to Western to grad school, and as I was there, luck would have it. And I talk about luck, and I talk about tapping people on the shoulders and always looking forward and looking back. And I think they're all based on our experiences. And I concur today, there is no straight path. Mine is convoluted, but I'm trying to line it up for the sake of time here. Just an unpredictable. I never would have expected, and when I was 10 years old, 15 years old, 25 years old, that I would have the opportunities and the accountability that I've had in sport. When I was at Western, there was a physiology prof, his name was Don Patterson, and he was asked to pilot what we now call the National Coaching Certification Program. And so he was like, they needed an exercise physiologist, a psychologist was the field hockey coach at York, and somebody else was doing the motor D. And so he said, hey, I need people. I need a dozen people to come and take this course for me. And the irony is he made it too hard, and the exercise physiologist actually failed the exam, which was kind of funny. But as that started, I didn't realize that this was going to be a level 3 certification, that I became the first female in the country to become certified to start working with provincial and national coaches. I did it because it was an opportunity that I sounded like I should embrace while I'm in grad school. And that became a really important piece for me as I moved along my coaching pathway and finishing at Western. But also when I sat at Western, I sat down with the dean after I finished my master's and said, well, I think I'm getting ready for a PhD. I'd really love to work at the university level. This is my aspirations and goals. And he was wonderful, but he said, no, not now, not yet. We just aren't seeing women in this field for another 5 or 10 years. So get out and work. And it was a very, like on the one hand, a hard conversation, but also a very significant sort of pivot or conversation for me. So pursuing the field of education and working, frankly, starting as a physics teacher and a phys ed teacher, I was able to carry on with coaching and coaching higher highest performing athletes at the same time, starting a family, all of those pieces. And then, you know, again, someone else had faith in you and said, yeah, I think you can do this. Would you like to try this? We need the following. And that invite of the opportunity, first of all, of having a boss that would let me fly to England for a weekend to do like a coaching certification piece with a, you know, a leading coach in Asia. That's unheard of as a teacher, to just sort of jump up and fly out for 3 days. And he saw it. And then my national organization, when there was an opportunity to be able to be an apprentice coach at a Commonwealth Games, I grabbed it. And that was a lifelong highlight, was the first opportunity to coach at a games, at a Commonwealth Games on Canadian soil. And as that grew, you know, the highlights of being able to do 15 different games in 15 different ways. But the highlight of coaching, being on the field of play with athletes, certainly Sydney was a very big one for my first Olympics. And then I went on to get very interested in the behind the scenes as I moved out of coaching after Beijing. What are the things we do behind the scenes to support athletes? I ran the satellite site for Salt Lake City Games. Incredible experience, learning all the pieces that we need to prepare and make the conditions the best they can be for athletes to be successful. At the same time, you know, other things, learning, failing, moving forward. I also became the president of my national sport organization through a negative sort of event that where we needed to get somebody in to do the role fairly quickly. But being the president of my national sport, I found in Canada lots of coherence building over about 6 or 7 years, and that's when I entered more into the Olympic movement. And through the Olympic movement, that is absolutely the opportunity to work with my sports, to work internationally, to work on and off the field of play, again, in providing those conditions. Big challenges. There are rooms I'd be in internationally where I was the only female from 150 countries trying to influence change. Some really big challenges, and they continue internationally, but still going and taking it to a certain point. As life proceeded, as I finished working, teaching at university and high school and elementary, running a school system, trying to lead in that area, I left that after 33, 34 years and wanted to influence, continue my work in sport, but also wanted to influence, improve the lives of Canadians on a bigger level. I had been visiting Indigenous communities. I'd understood more deeply understanding what it meant to welcome hundreds of Syrians to Canada and get them on soccer fields. All these different things were telling me there was a bigger picture opportunity. And fortunately, at the same time, the government was being reformed to have senators that could come from a variety of sectors, be selected a very independent process, and try to influence and shape. So right now I have that role, and in that role I am taking every opportunity I am to talk about well-being, mental health, physical health, recovery from a pandemic. We're very immersed in what that means. And in the Olympic world, I'm honored to be the chair of the team selection committee for the K-Olympic Committee, where we're making adjustments every second to help our athletes have the very best experience and their best performance in Tokyo. And the two worlds have crossed over because we need these two worlds working together. Snapshot. There you go.
Great, thanks. That's a panoramic snapshot for sure. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Marty. And I will just mention that Marty's actually doing one of our breakout sessions this afternoon, and we'll be talking about some of her roles, and that's called Get On Board. She's had those experiences. Marty, you've certainly been a trailblazer in a number of areas, and I think you give a sense that, you know, in your winding path, it does take commitment, and there's sometimes, for example, jumping at that apprentice coaching opportunity where you probably had to leave some things behind and take that leap. And I hope you'll talk about some of those this afternoon. I'm going to pivot back now to Cheryl. And Cheryl, I wonder if you can tell us, so you've been involved in some exciting moments in London, Ontario sport. And for those of you on the line who are not from London, of course, we're the premier sports city in Canada. Okay. So Cheryl, what have been some of the best things or the highlights about your involvement in as a sport leader?
Yeah, there are so many, Alison. And I think foundationally, it really comes down to community and what community means in regards to events. Eva certainly knows, working for NSOs from that level, it's very important that you find the right fit for your product in regards to a community. And what's great about London, first of all, is, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the partnership that we have with Western, not only for facilities and logistics, but the learning opportunities through events that we are able to provide for students looking to navigate their way into sport beyond their athletic career. Certainly, some really great stories stand out for me. One of them certainly is para hockey. Para hockey is a relatively new sport when you talk about it, but what it meant to London in terms of legacy for athletes, it was amazing. So we hosted the World Championships, and we had 2 athletes from our area that were captains on the Canadian national team. And it meant so much for these athletes to come home and compete at home, not only for the ability of their friends and family to be able to easily get to watch them. Their grandparents were their biggest fans, and it was great to see them in the stands. But more importantly, for those 2 athletes, they had met at London Health Sciences as they were both undergoing cancer treatment, and it was so important for them to come back and be able to play and recognize those doctors and nurses that saved their lives, and they were able to find sport in a very devastating time in their lives. So that certainly is meaningful. And again, the Special Olympics national games here at Western, where our Western football team became, gods to some of the athletes because they're right there in the trenches helping them out. So many stories. Thanks, Alison.
Great. Thanks, Cheryl. And the thing I like about this panel is that we have women representing some similar aspects, if we say, well, sport leadership, sport journalism, but you're all doing such different things. And it really sends a message that there are many different things that you can be doing in sport. It's not just, being, the head of the Olympic Committee, and that's all we know. Many different levels. Eva, I'm going to turn to you, and you've done a number of different things. And speaking of different levels and being able to pivot or reinvent yourself, equestrian, we kind of joke about that. Those of us who know you, we've heard about soccer and basketball and all these sorts of things. But so Eva, then did you ever get on a horse? I don't know if you did, but I want to know who were some of your supports and allies along the way, and particularly when you had some challenging times?
One of them is right here on this panel, Marty. I remember at Olympic sessions, these are late evening chats. This is not the official program. This is the unofficial program where there's a few women around it, in particular women in administrative leadership roles. And, I'm younger for sure. And Marty pulls me aside and we're sitting down, and it's don't give up. You got to keep going. This is part of the journey. We believe in you. I believe in you. Here to help you. Like those kinds of things in those moments, they're critical to keep you going. Truly, those allies and even those words. I mean, Alison, I still remember to this day doing my graduate work, and I think it was one of my first presentations in the master's program. And you came over to me afterwards, the whole class had left, and you said, "You're really good at presenting. Do you know that?" Like, I had no idea until you told me. And then I realized, you know what, I actually really enjoy that. And, so much of the time as women, we tell ourselves we can't do something, or we don't have the skill, or, and then it's someone outside of you who either sees something in you, who recognizes that you need that encouragement in that moment to keep going, and to remind you that you're not alone. Like, you might feel lonely in some of these moments, but surely there are women and there are other leaders that have gone through it before you that that are there and sort of pop up when you need them to keep you going. That's been critical in my career. Another ally for me that I'll mention is Gord Peterson, who I know Marty knows, but I mean, through all the trials and tribulations of what I faced leading in sport, which truly I did not realize that the other side of the off the field sport side really is not much like the on field side. I mean, I got into this because of the passion I have for sport and the care that I have for athletes and coaches and making sure that they have the best experience. This is what drives me every single day. The other side of that world, there, I mean, Marty knows this there, and she mentioned it. I mean, there's some dark moments and some ugly sides of that. But as I said, there are some amazing people, some of the best people I've ever met, that when you're around them, when you meet them, when you keep them close to you, like Gord, he was there through many of those moments of just helping me navigate some tricky situations along the way to ensure that integrity was at the forefront, that I stayed true to myself at the forefront, and also knew when it was time to move on and pivot and go to a new journey. So yes, it's been a whirlwind for sure, but I can say now, even teaching about leadership, all of those experiences have given me what I need today to be able to share that with the next generation, of them finding that in themselves, finding their voice, and stepping into those challenging situations with confidence.
Right. Thanks, Eva. And that does bring up the comment again about confidence that Shireen had mentioned. And so I think two messages here. One, as women staying in sport, we need to, or wanting to continue in sport, to draw confidence, draw energy from others, as Cheryl's noted in the thing, surround yourself with good people. But it's also important for women and their allies in sport to realize that you can be that confidence builder, and even if it's by example or speaking up, that it can definitely make a difference. And so on that, Eva, I'm just going to let you answer. We have a question from Bryn, who she's completing her undergrad degree at UNB, and I'll give a little shout out there. My son goes there, and she wants to do a master's degree in sport management. But so she's wondering about this advice for transitioning from on the field to off the field. What would be a key point that you'd share with Bryn and others?
Yeah, the key point is there's many programs out there. The faculty make it, so Alison, Karen, Darwin, many individuals at Western made that experience for me. But once I chose that I was going to do graduate work in sport management, I fully committed to that. So I let go of some of these other things that I thought about and went 2 feet in. And everything I did through that program, I did gearing myself towards the area of sport that I wanted to work in, which was certainly administrative leadership, executive leadership. So everything that I did in those 2 years, it was all geared towards that. Every assignment, every exercise, anything that I could do that was about organization, system building, people in those systems. That's my background. Sociology was the root of sort of where I came from. Everything was committed to that. So my advice to you is the transition is easier than you think. Takes a while to work yourself up to sort of stepping off the field, but it is easier than you think. There are wonderful programs out there. Have a look at the faculty and start contacting them and having conversations with people who are profs that have a background that you're interested in, and they will guide you.
Thanks, Eva. And I will also then just give a shout out to, we have a breakout session this afternoon, which I have a bad feeling is at the same time as Marty. So sorry about this, Marty, but Alex Cron is presenting about athlete transition and the role of athlete identity in that. Okay, I'm going to, we have a few minutes left. I'm going to flip back to Lori. And Lori, thank you. You started us off on a great path with your story. And we don't get to be around journalists all that often. And we know you've talked to some amazing people. You mentioned a few Clara Hughes. And so maybe you can tell us what have been some of the most inspiring stories that you have written? I don't know if you can say that. Are you inspired by your own stories? The most inspiring people that you've talked to or events that you've covered where you've said, you know what, this is amazing about sport or women in sport or this particular person in sport. What stands out for you?
It's kind of a difficult question. I think just pure athletic wise, probably one of the highlights where I said, yeah, this is the job for me was being in the opening ceremonies of the Athens Olympics. It was my first ever Olympics.
And what was it about?
I just like having been an athlete, and then I grew up, I think I said at the beginning, I didn't really watch a lot of sports and I didn't read sports, but I was a huge Olympics fan. So to actually be sitting there in the stadium for my first one blew my mind. Actually makes me really sad that in Tokyo the families won't be able to be there with the athletes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, so tough. There's so many stories about I come across them daily, and even this last summer watching the events that happened in the NBA bubble in Florida with all the Black Lives Matter stuff going on in the States, and every day was like inspiring.
Okay. And so again, with your role, you're inspired by the fact that you get to, live and breathe sport and comment on and reflect on that. Okay, Shireen, I'm going to move to you, and this is about stories, and you seem to be particularly inspired. You've shared with us about sport and some of the injustices that you've seen in sport. So if you can just share with us, what are some of the biggest changes, most important changes that you have seen in sport? So I want you to answer that one first. But what is still needed? So I want you to give us the upside first. What have been some of the positive things that we've seen about sport and maybe particularly about or by women in sport, and what is still needed?
Yeah, thanks. I think one of the most important things is, from a media perspective, is really breaking down this idea that sports isn't political in some fashion, and having to insist that athletes or anybody involved in sport compartmentalize their identities in order to participate. I don't think that's right. It's certainly not a part of my existence as an athlete and somebody who works in sports spaces at all. So I really like the conversations that are happening. Unfortunately, it took the murder of a Black man in real time for this to start happening. And I think this idea of what systems are and how they're connected is really important, how that comes through in sport, whether it's transphobia, and the United States is criminalizing trans youth in sport right now. And I think it's very problematic. I also think, a lack of Indigenous inclusion and involvement in discussions is a problem, and has always been, essentially since time immemorial. And also the discussion about, a Blackness and anti-Blackness in sport. And I think we tend to see it as something that doesn't occur in Canada, but we would be very wrong to do that. And I mean, I think the discussions have something happening elsewhere. Racism doesn't stop at the border, and we need to really look at ourselves. What do our boards look like? Who are we sitting with? Who was at the table? Who was involved in the discussions? And the fact that we're actually, having this, the fact that I have an opportunity to say that here. And who are we looking around? And it's not enough to talk about diversity and then have white women lead those conversations. That's not what diversity is. Like having 3 white men and 2 women at a board is a country club dinner. It's not a diversity and inclusion situation. And we have to rethink, are queer communities included? Are Indigenous communities included? Are people of color included? And I feel this very strongly. So, I mean, this is one way to do it. And in terms of what I like to see happening and some of the stories that are happening, I was on a call with, there's so many things, like the stories about the PWHPA. I'm a big lover of women's hockey. Arguably, I think we need to address sport in Canada. I think it's a shame that we rank so highly in so many levels. We're a top 10 ranked FIFA team and we don't have a domestic league. Why is this happening? We don't have a domestic league and a sustainable one in hockey, nor do we have one in basketball. There's conversations happening, and the failure in the fall of the CWHL was a tragedy. We arguably produced the best women's hockey players in the world, and I will die on that hill. I love women's hockey in this country. And I hate that that's where we are. Like, is this who Canada is? It's not enough to just support these women during the Olympics or World Championships. Where are the gaps here? What's happening with that? And I think this is something we really need to think about, because so many of our athletes that are incredible and have to work double jobs, Can you imagine having to work full time and then compete on the weekends? What would the Maple Leafs look like in their, then? I mean, I'm not trying to pick on Maple Leaf players. I'm a Habs fan, or long-suffering Habs fan. But I'm just trying to say these are things that we don't think about when we think about women's sports, and we don't like to talk about because it's not sexy and it's not fun to get into the nitty-gritty of what the athletes are living. And I really love the idea of this conversation being about not just about athletes. I really like women participating in sport at any level, at official level, at admin levels, at medic levels, at physio and sports exercise. There's so many ways for women to get involved in sport, and I really love that about this conversation. We're not just looking at athletes as a way to participate. So if anyone's out there, you're interested at in sports media, it's a tough industry, but just to say, what I do like is happening is community that has been built. There's a community of Canadian sport media is not a huge place. It's quite small compared to other places. So there's a community out there to help you. If you're a racialized person, a budding sports journalist, look for mentors. I work a lot with the Ryerson School of Journalism and other one in Carleton particularly. Young women reach out to me all the time. Like, what can we do? Where do we look? And to young women out there, trust your gut. You will be told no so many more times than you will be told yes. And I'm sure everyone on this panel has been in a room in a place where you're the only woman there. And I certainly have been the only racialized woman there. So think about that. And there are people out there that are willing to help you. They definitely are, and stick to that. Like the Whisper Network and Women Supporting Women in Journalism is a real thing. This is like Burn It All Down was created from DM group in Twitter, supporting each other. That's literally how it came to be, and creating a space for us, because we're also made to think we have to fight over places. I do work with TSN very regularly, and the conversations they just had the first NBA all broadcast. This is no small potatoes. This is a big deal. And what's happening in Sacramento now, and I think we keep these, and I don't want it to just be, let's talk about women and Women's History Month. I mean, we're still women in November and in August. We should keep doing this. So there's a momentum happening here, and I like it. So I want to keep with that positive nature. And if I didn't really think it could make a difference, I don't think any of us would be here.
Right. And it's about voice. It's not, as you're saying, it's not just about representation, but it's about having voice. And all of the women on this panel have certainly had a voice. And that's the message that we need to take forward. And for people who are online listening, whether you're a young woman in sport and looking to stay in the game or continue in the game, or you're an ally of somebody like that, it's not just about them, being given an opportunity or a place at the table, but being allowed to have a voice at the table. Okay, we have just a few more minutes. I'm going to turn it back to Marty. And Marty, do you have any other any comments based on what you've heard from the panelists here?
Yes, and I really wish I could see all of you virtually that are participating, but we can't. But we're pretending we can see you today. I just want to jump off first with some of the comments that Shireen has made, and I am big supporter and advocate of the number of pieces that are hopefully things we don't have to talk about in a decade or two. And so this whole what it really means to be inclusive, what it really means to be diverse, how we go about doing this in a respectful way, that we're ensuring, and it'll come up again this afternoon, but we're ensuring no matter where we are, on the field of play, supporting the field of play, on boards, in organization, are we representative of the needs of all of this country? And it's a really big thing for me, whether it was the Olympic movement or whether it was in education. Christmas of grade 4, think back, and that's a long time for some of us. That is magically, not in a good way, when we lose most of our girls. It's this thing, and it's taken me years and years and years and years to figure out all the pieces and parts of it. And so how and what are the partners there in ensuring that we're trying to keep young girls involved in sport? That's a piece of this. And so as I listen to you, it's all kind of churning around, and yes, we have a lot of care, but not the execution yet on how new Canadians are embraced and engaged, and the power of sport. our new Canadians love the soccer field and they love camping. That's two beginning stories, and how we're going about that and making it meaningful. For our participants today, I think when I listen to everybody, I'm reminded we're going to make lots of mistakes. We're going to have high moments, and I've had devastating moments. I've had moments where I've been told one day I'm completely valued to run an organization, and the next day I'm on the chopping block. So, you know, these are things that are sometimes difficult to manage, but from those sometimes perceived failures, a lot of learning and a lot of momentum in your life. I've had to make decisions as a chef de mission for Delhi at 3 a.m. with our prime minister. Do we go to Delhi? Because there were some issues that we could not put athletes on planes for. Those are pretty big ticket decisions that are built, and the ability and the confidence are all from the hard work that you're doing now. And it is all in the work. None of this is easy, but it's achievable and it's doable. And by not sort of thinking yourself, oh, I don't think I can do that, don't say no so fast, and really understand who your supports are. Because sometimes the people you think are supporting you, the very best, they're actually not your best supporters. You don't need people to say, you're great, way to go, awesome, yeah, you're on track. You need people who you love and care about, who are going to challenge you, to push you, to ask you why you're doing what you're doing, and to really help you courageously. These are the world is an oyster in some ways, but there's also that oyster that requires a lot of work, commitment, confidence, failure, and really being a lifelong learner and listener. If I could recommend one book, You're Not Listening is a recent publication that tells us amazing things about communication. And we have to be better in the room, not equal. We have to be better and more prepared than the person beside us.
Great. Thanks, Marty. And we certainly have been listening. And of course, an important part of having a voice is that you have to be able to listen to the other voices. Thank you to this amazing group of speakers. I must cut this off. We could keep listening to you for quite a while now. One thing I think a takeaway has been that, you know, all the women on this panel have had an early start, and their experiences or early experiences in sport really set a foundation, even if they moved away from that and came back, and that certainly probably resonates with most of our stories for the rest of us. I think, you know, these women are sending us, all of us, a message to make a difference off the field as well, particularly after we leave the field. And there are many ways to do that, and some very powerful messages. So thank you very much to our panel. Some logistics here. So you're going to exit this session. It's lunchtime now. Has been mentioned, you're welcome to join us for some virtual networking. You just click on the networking booth, and I'm hoping that some of our panelists will stay around. Now, you're going to be matched with anyone else attending the conference for a 3-minute chat. It's pretty random. It matches you with whoever else is clicking on. There's 2 of you, and it's over a direct video call, so you'll get to see somebody. This is not going to be recorded, and once it'll give you a 3-minute countdown and you're done. So you might want to chat about if you've just seen this person on a panel, or what they liked about a particular panel, or what they're doing in sport, or what they would like to do in sport. After the, actually also during the lunch, please, you're welcome to visit the expo, where we have several of our supporters and sponsors are indicated there, and you'll also get a chance to watch that very powerful opening video again. I encourage you to do that. It certainly gave me chills the first time I looked at it. After lunch and networking, you then head back to the sessions button. They will open at 12:55, so 5 minutes to 1. And then you select the breakout session of your choice, and there are 3 concurrent breakout sessions. Feel free to check the program to just get a reminder about what is available there. And Vicky's just noting as well that we have the list of resources and videos are in reception, as well as you can connect to the schedule. So breakout sessions start at 1 o'clock sharp. You will be able to start signing into those by 12:55. So enjoy some networking now, and thank you again to this fantastic panel. Thanks, Shireen.